Angel's Voice, ASMR. No safety in numbers, page 224. Ryan pulled the thick jacket tighter around his shoulders. The shivers were overwhelming now. Rattling his teeth, he unclenched his jaws. He was cold, so very cold, and couldn't get warm no matter how many jackets he buried himself under. They didn't in Harry's after escaping the jail in the parking garage. Mr. Reynolds had thought they could hole up in one of the back sections between the crowded racks and avoid the cops. He'd been right. Not a soul had bothered them. Ryan had excused himself, saying he'd hurt his shoulder tackling the guard and curled up in the winter coats. He wasn't sure how many hours had passed. He'd fallen in and out of consciousness. Once, he'd opened his eyes to darkness, a spinning black that terrified him like he was a kid again. Cracking open his eyelids now, he saw Cracking open his eyelids now, he saw the comforting glare of the overhead lighting. It seemed unsteady, but swirling light was somehow better than swirling black. Ryan. The voice was nearby, though it sounded muffled to Ryan's ears. A hand shook his shoulder. Shrimp. Mike peeled back the jacket. His eyes bulged. It must have been bad. Were his fingers blue? His eyes red? When would the coughing start? How long until he died? Mr. Reynolds stood a good distance apart. We should leave him, he said. No way he's going to make an escape in that condition. We don't leave a man behind, Drew said from somewhere behind Ryan. I'll carry him. Mike tucked the jacket tighter around Ryan's shoulders. He's too sick. Mike stood. Ryan wanted to plead with them not to leave him, that he could walk, but his brain had lost contact with his mouth. He groaned. It was the best he could do. We have to get him some food or some medicine. Mike wiped his hands on a t-shirt hanging from the nearest rack. Mr. Reynolds stepped closer. We have to get out of here. Mike stood. This isn't a negotiation. Don't mess with me, kid. I'm not blowing our escape just to save your pal. Let me say it again. Mike pulled a gun from his waistband. This isn't a negotiation. Mr. Reynolds backed away. Where'd you get that? The cop. Mike held the gun level with Mr. Reynolds' chest. Dude, Drew muttered. Mr. Reynolds put up his hands. Fine, he said. We'll get him some food. Mike lowered his gun. Glad we agree. Sometime later, Mike woke Ryan again. We have to move, he whispered, handing Ryan a bottle of Sport Aid. Ryan nodded. He sipped the liquid, which even at room temperature felt cold. Everything was cold. He slid his arms into the sleeves of the jacket. Mike zipped the front, then pulling him to standing. As Mike helped Ryan hobble down the aisle, he explained that an announcement had been made, that the government was quarantining the mall because of some flu and that people had gone insane as a result. I have it, Ryan said. Well, duh, Mike smiled and gave him a slight noogie, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get your sick ass out of here. Ryan could almost forget how terrifying Mike had been holding that gun. The plan was to go to the Home Mart and get a jackhammer and blast through an exterior wall. Mr. Reynolds hoped to break through after nightfall and then crawl through the shadows to safety. The four took the escalator up to the second floor. The rioters crowded the first level. None of these sheep are getting out of the main exits, Mr. Reynolds said, smiling that thin smile of his. But we have to thank them for all that noise. The cops couldn't hear a jackhammer if it was drilling directly into their skulls. The second floor was not entirely empty. Individuals and small gangs raided the abandoned stores, dragging loot out in piles. The four had to swerve around the looters in their troves. Ryan tried to keep pace with the others, shambling along on feet. They felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. Mike barked encouragement into his ear. You keep moving step by step, Shrimp. You gotta get that goal. Ryan stepped over and over for Mike, but then his foot caught on something and the wall shifted and he was on the ground. Get him up, Mr. Reynolds shouted. The world spun again. Blurs of color swirled in front of him and Mike and Drew hefted him up. In here, Mike growled, dragging Ryan backward out of the hall. From the posters, Ryan knew they were in Shep's. He liked that he would die in Shep's. Maybe Mike could hold him against the climbing wall one last time. Mike sat Ryan on a weight bench and turned to tell Drew something. Ryan thought he saw a man in the back of the store. Then Mr. Reynolds was screaming. A red-fledged hunting arrow stuck out from his shoe. A voice came from the back of the store. I've taken over Shep's, the man yelled. Go find your own place. Mike dragged That's it. Mike stood. He glared through a hole in the display wall at the guy. I'm sick of being screwed with. He nudged Drew in the shoulder. You distract him over there by the kayaks. Drew nodded and skulked to the end of the aisle. Mike grabbed Mr. Reynolds' hand, which was on the arrow shaft. Don't pull it out. Then Mike handed Ryan the sport aid. Drink. Drew pounded along the side wall, ducking from display to display. Mike sprinted across the center of the store to the opposite wall, and Ryan crawled to the edge of the display to watch. Drew nodded and skulked to the end of the aisle. Mike grabbed Mr. Reynolds' hand, which was on the arrow shaft. Don't pull it out. Then Mike handed Ryan the sport aid. Drink. Drew pounded along the side wall, ducking from display to display. Mike sprinted across the center of the store to the opposite wall. Ryan crawled to the edge of the display to watch, and Drew dove for the kayaks, knocking several over. The guy fired an arrow into the hole of the one closest to Drew, and Mike appeared from behind the display nearest the guy and shot him point blank in the temple. The man fell forward across the counter, and red spattered marred the wall. Ryan felt even colder, not sick cold, but like he might never be able to not see that red stain. He dragged himself back behind the display, and he wished he hadn't moved. Serves the bastard right, Mr. Reynolds said, gently prodding at his shoe. Shadows appeared at the edges of Ryan's vision. They were coming for him, the demons. He was dying. He just witnessed a murder, and he had maybe killed 2 cops himself, and these shadows were coming now for him. He didn't want to die. He waved his hands and tried to push the shadows away. Something grabbed his arm. The shadows were everywhere now. He begged them to leave him alone. He didn't want to die. The black took over, and everything was cold. Day 7. Friday. Shay. She woke with a start in the darkness, heart racing, a body pressed against her side. Was she under some pile? She remembered a wave of people screaming as they rushed toward her. Her eyes adjusted, and she saw the red lettering of an exit sign far down the hall. So she was not stuck under a pile of bodies. She was in some hallway. Her breathing slowed. She guessed that the body next to her was Marco's. At least, she hoped that was true. She shuffled out from under him. He shifted in his sleep and readjusted against the wall, but did not wake. Shay's purse was still slung around her body. She fished inside the bag and took out her keys. One of them had a tiny LED light in it. Her father had given it to her as a safety measure, in case she ever tried to get home in the dark. She was pressing the bulky red key onto her hand, remembering his words brought tears to her eyes. I'm trying to get home. All she wanted was to be home. Given the almost total darkness of the hallway, her tiny lamp illuminated the walls with what seemed like a brilliant white light. The sleeper was indeed Marco. He sat slumped in a corner at the end of the long white hallway. She flashed the light to her left and saw 2 large doors, one of which had paper clips printed in block type on it. They were in the service hallway outside the medical center, and Marco must have dragged her down here from the food court. She touched her fingers to her temple, remembering suddenly being knocked over and blacking out. A loose band of gauze was wrapped around her head. She winced at the size of the goose egg under the skin above her right ear. Her head throbbed, but the darkness kept the pain from feeling too bad. Why, though, were they in the hallway and not in the actual medical ward? Worry oozed through her belly. Had the stampede run over her and the food court spread throughout the mall? Where's Preety? The doors to the paperclip were barred on the service hallway side by a crowbar. Shay stood and pulled the rod of metal from between the handles. The stockroom was as dark as the service hallway. Shining her small light in front of her, Shay saw smashed boxes, cases of pins dumped across the floor, broken plastic and glass. She walked carefully toward where the loading dock should have been, where she'd guessed the hazmat people had their passage to the real world, and the door was closed. Not a ray of light pierced the black. It must have been walled over like the exits. The medical teams had left, sealed them in, but what about all the patients? Had they taken Preety and Nanny with them? Please. Shay navigated through the debris in the stockroom floor to the doors that led into the main part of the store. What once had been the emergency medical center was a disaster zone. The maze of curtains had collapsed, creating tents in some places, while in other areas the fabric was shredded, tangled amidst the rods of the metal frames that had held the curtains up. The glass of the front wall to the paper clips was completely smashed, and beyond that, the plywood barrier lay in pieces against the wall in the corridor. Something groaned off to Shay's left, and lifting a piece of curtain wall, still sluggish hand shot out and grabbed her ankle. Shay kicked the hand off. She had to find Preety. She lifted a wall of fabric and found a person in a hazmat suit curled over a toppled bed. She lifted a wall of fabric and found a person in a hazmat suit curled over a toppled bed. Shay touched the suit. The person, startled, rolled over. "Is it over?" the person asked. He wasn't wearing a face mask. "Shouldn't you be outside with the rest of them?" Shay said, her voice dripping with venom. The man stood. "My suit was torn in the evacuation. I was deemed exposed and had to stay behind." Shay recognized him from earlier with Nanny. "Dr. Chen, have you seen my sister?" He shook his head. "She should be where you left her." He scanned the disaster zone. "What have we done?" He sounded humbled. "Good." Shay pushed past him and began digging through the junk once again. He worked next to her, helped her lift the heavy pieces. He paused to check the people they found. Shay kept going. Lifting a panel of curtain, Shay found her. "Dr. Chen," she screamed. Preety was beside her gurney, which lay on its side. She wasn't moving. "Why isn't she moving?" Dr. Chen took Shay's arm and held her steady. "Let me take a look." The whole world was blurry. Shay rubbed her fist across her eyes. Her contacts were so dry. "She's asleep," Dr. Chen said from somewhere below. "Her fever has broken. She's going to be okay." Shay dropped to her knees and hugged Dr. Chen. He patted her back awkwardly, like he was not used to comforting. As Shay remembered, his bedside manner had been non-existent. They righted Preety's gurney, and Dr. Chen laid her on the mattress. Shay took off one of her t-shirts and dapped Preety's sweaty face. Her eyes fluttered. "Is it morning?" she asked. She must have slept through the riots. Preety had all the luck. "You're better," she said, her words choked by a sob. Preety smiled, then curled her knees up. "Tired," she said. Shay kissed her forehead. "Where's Nanny?" Preety mumbled. "Nanny?" Shay tugged on Dr. Chen's shoulder. He helped a man back onto his cot, then turned to Shay. "Glad to see your sister made it," he said. "Where's the ICU?" she asked. Dr. Chen seemed surprised she knew about it. "I'm not sure it's safe to go back there. Just tell me where it is." He led her to the back corner of the sales floor opposite the window, and as they walked, Shay noticed a high-pitched whine that grew louder. A hole had been cut in the wall leading into the neighboring store. Thick plastic hung where the door should have been. "We needed to keep the facility separate," Dr. Chen said, pushing aside the doorway. A whine became a shriek, and it was coming from the machines. The sound of flatlining. Shay covered her ears. There were rows of patients, all with tubes in their mouths like Nanny, and Shay couldn't tell which machines were making the noise. Shay ran to the closest one, an old man. His machine wailed. Air pumped into him, but his chest didn't move. He was dead, his body cold. Shay checked the next bed, another corpse, and another, and Nanny wasn't like them. She was alive. Their faces were blue-black. Each suck of air from the machine forced a froth of blood up the tubes. Nanny couldn't be like them. One of the blue faces was familiar. No, she was asleep, not dead, sleeping. Dr. Chen grabbed Shay's shoulders. "You shouldn't have to see this." Shay wanted to scream, but she was cold, frozen, her eyes burned, dry as paper. "Is she dead?" Dr. Chen wrapped his arm around her and pulled her away. "Let's get you back to your sister." Her legs gave way first, stumbling out from under her, and the room went black. She felt Dr. Chen grab her, keep her from hitting the floor, but all she heard was the shrieking of the machines, the screams of the dead. Light shone red through Ryan's eyelids. He was alive. He opened his eyes slowly. His lips felt dry and cracked. "He's awake," Mr. Reynolds said, from off to Ryan's right. Ryan tried to move his arms, but found them pinned to his chest by the sleeping bag he was packed in. He pushed up onto his elbows, and Mike knelt at his side and looked like he might cry. "I knew you'd make it," he said, though for Mike to be near tears. Ryan feared his survival had seemed a long shot at some point in the night. Drew came over with something that smelled like chicken soup. "From the employee's locker," he said. "Cup o' crap." He spooned some into Ryan's mouth. Ryan sputtered at the hot liquid. "I think I can feed myself," he said. Oh, Drew feigned offense. "Oh, look who's the big man now." Taking the hot soup in his hand, Ryan wondered at the gift of this morning. He was alive. "Now, can we get out of here?" Mr. Reynolds said, glancing out Shep's entrance. "Of course it's too quiet to drill." He picked up a tennis ball and chucked it at the wall. The bong of the ball against the paint seemed to echo through the post-riot silence. They'd lost their chance of escape via jackhammer because of him, but Ryan couldn't feel guilty. He hadn't choked on his own blood. His fingers pinkish white, and he was alive. The morning sunlight fought its way through a thin layer of clouds and to shine on the tile in the hall. How long since he'd really appreciated the sky, the skylights. He slurped a steaming mouthful from the cup. "I know a way out," he said. It didn't take long to get the guys into harnesses. Companies made them practically idiot-proof at this point. Ryan pulled 2 lengths of rope from the rack and collected a bunch of quick draws and regular carabiners and a belay device. The plan was for Ryan to free climb the column closest to the central skylight. The columns, which stretched from the first floor all the way to the ceiling, were essentially colorfully painted scaffolding. 4 thick poles formed a square, between which diagonally placed metal beams formed irregular triangles. Every few yards there was a neon sign or artsy metal thing strapped to the poles, but up by the ceiling the scaffold was clear. Once at the top, Ryan would belay the others as they climbed. When all 3 reached the ceiling, they would use an ice axe to bust open the skylight and escape onto the roof. The only problem was that Ryan still felt like crap. The soup and 2 bottles of Sport Aid helped, but they only went so far. He'd washed the fever sweat from his body in the little staff bathroom in the back and changed into some climbing shorts and a t-shirt. In one of the bathroom closets, he'd found some Tylenol and pounded 2. He felt a little better, but not 100%. Ryan hung the ropes from his harness and tied on his climbing shoes. The others hovered nearby. They'd all judged his plan to be a winner. "That's QB thinking," Drew had said. Mike had merely clapped him on the shoulder like a proud father. Mr. Reynolds had begrudgingly agreed to the plan after bitching about having to engage in physical activity. Mike had told him he was free to stay behind. They walked cautiously up to the 3rd floor. The halls were oddly empty, like the riot had cleared all the people from them all. But every once in a while they heard coughing or crying, betraying the people still camped out in the stores. Ryan planned to climb without a safety rope, but when Mike stood at the base of the column and took in the height of the climb that remained coupled with the drop to the 1st floor courtyard, he'd strapped on the belay device and asked Ryan what to do. "No way I'm letting you die after saving your ass all this time," Mike said, smirking. Ryan showed him the basics of belaying a person. There wasn't much to show, and Mike was a fast learner. When he'd finished, he took Mike's hand. "I owe you," he said, pulling Mike in for a shoulder bump. Funny how a guy could completely freak you out, but also be the only person you trusted. Mike patted Ryan's arm, almost hugging him. "Dad's always had my back, and I will always have yours." The first few feet were easy, but once Ryan got halfway to the ceiling, his hands began to sweat from nerves. Patting chalk powder from his pouch onto his palms, he tried to think of anything but the plash of the central fountain some 40 feet below. He fastened a binner to the scaffold around his belay rope. At least he'd only fall so far. The last time he climbed, he'd been with Shay. He wondered where she was, why she hadn't met him in the parking garage, though now he was grateful that she hadn't. He didn't want her to know about the cops he'd bulldozed. Thinking about the cops didn't help his sweat problem. So he thought of Shay falling toward him, the way the harness had wrapped around her waist, the smoothness of her skin when he touched her. And he was at the top with a hard-on, but at the top. 60 feet stretched between him and the 1st floor, but he was mere inches from the skylight and freedom. He pressed his fingers to the cold glass, then clipped himself to the column with a quick draw. He arranged the rope through the bottom carabiners of 2 other quick draws attached to 2 points on the scaffold and signaled Mike to release the belay device. Ryan pulled it up, hooked the belay device to his harness, and threaded the other end of the rope back down to Mike. Mr. Reynolds climbed next. The fact that he was old and out of shape combined with his bum foot made him doubly slow. The weight was agonizing. Ryan sucked water from the pouch he'd strapped to his back to keep the tickles in his throat at bay. Once Mr. Reynolds was up, Ryan hooked him to the column with a quick draw, then lowered the rope down for Mike to climb. Mike was fast, scampering up the rungs like a squirrel on a tree. A hand pulled the ice axe from the webbing of Ryan's hydration pack, and Ryan glanced over his shoulder, securing the belay rope tied across his thigh. Mr. Reynolds had shuffled to the side of the column nearest the skylight. He had the axe poised below the glass. "What are you doing?" Ryan yelled. "The plan is to wait for everyone to get to the top before busting out." "I've waited long enough." Mr. Reynolds smashed the skylight, and Ryan threw his free arm over his face as splinters of glass rained down onto the fountain floor. Screams erupted from the 1st floor. Apparently they had attracted an audience. Mr. Reynolds hoisted himself through the hole in the glass, and fresh air tousled Ryan's hair. He'd forgotten the scent of fall air, the feeling of crispness. Mike pulled himself to the top. "What the hell?" he shouted. Ryan heard the pulsing chop of helicopter blades through the broken window, and as it grew louder, a breeze adjusted to match the noise. Mike pulled himself up and peered through the hole. We're screwed. He dropped back down. Ryan heard tromping footsteps. He could almost see the cops on the roof, and Mr. Reynolds would be driven back through the hole. Ryan unhooked the beaner from Mike's harness and attached it to the back of his own. He handed Mike the belay device. "Catch me," he said. Just then, Mr. Reynolds plummeted through the fractured glass, dropping down towards the fountain, screaming. Ryan pushed off from the column and fell. Adrenaline rushed through his veins. He opened his arms and legs in time to wrap them around Mr. Reynolds. Mike pulled the line taut between the gut-busting force of the rope catching and the drag of Mr. Reynolds' body. Ryan nearly lost his grip, but the bear hug held them together. The line swung towards the strips of walkway spanning the open courtyard. When the line bent and swung them under the third-floor passage, Ryan released Mr. Reynolds onto the second-floor walkway. The old bastard dropped onto the tile and cried out. Ryan owed him nothing now. The rope swung back out into the void, and Ryan closed his eyes. Blood pumped through him. Sweat dripped off his face. He was alive. Opening his eyes, he saw a crowd of cops gathering. They were all screwed, all of them, nowhere to hide, dangling in space, but he was alive for the moment, and that was enough. Marco, page 245. His first thought was waking. Where is Shay? Her body has been beside him, but now he was alone. The lights buzzed overhead. He heard voices from inside the paper clips. On the sales floor, a man in a hazmat suit stood kneeling and toppled curtains and equipment. His tent of a helmet hung behind him, an outsider now trapped on the inside. The senator was in the room with them, as were a couple of security guards and a cop. They were all digging through the trash. The voices came from beneath the trash. "Where's Shayla?" Marco yelled. The hazmat guy pointed to a part of the room behind him, the already cleared part. Marco found her asleep on a gurney beside the little sister. The grandmother was nowhere in sight. From how sick she'd been, she was most likely dead. Shay and the sister were alone in this mall, like him. Marco touched Shay's arm. She rolled slightly and groaned. His mind whirred into action. They needed food, a safe place to hide out, medicine. He could try to steal supplies from the EMC, but the cops would be on him before he got halfway out the door. Did he dare venture out into the chaos of the mall proper, alone? Two guards made their way back toward Marco. It was the guys from the restaurant the other day. Marco hid behind a curtain that he had righted and turned on his pilfered police radio. "We have one on the third floor and the other is descending the pillar. You guys grab the kid hanging from the rope. Are you sure it's the demolition derby guys?" "Yep, the ID on the guy at the bottom of the pillar says Drew Bonner. No doubt it's Richter on the pole and Murphy on the rope. Old guy's being subdued on a second-floor walkway." So Richter had been the one to organize the escape through the garage. He should have stuck with Marco. Now he was one descent away from being arrested. And then it dawned on him. He could help Mike Richter, and Richter could watch his back and protect Shay and his sister. It was a match made in hell. Marco stuck the radio in his jacket. He tucked the thin hospital blanket around Shay and the sister, then left through the back doors into the service hallway. He slid the cop's card key through the elevator's reader, and the doors opened. "I am the master of all I survey." He rode up the third floor, then exited the service halls into the main corridor. Scanning the area, he spotted Richter on the central column nearest the movie theaters. Two cops stood at the base, one with a hand on Drew Bonner's arm, both of which were behind his back, most likely in cuffs. A few people gawked from inside the entrance to the movie theater, but it was early yet, so the halls were empty. Based on the distribution of service doors near the grill and shake, Marco assumed that a service door existed down the hall away from the theaters. But how to distract the cops? There was no time to search for the perfect tool, and he glanced around him. A fire extinguisher. Marco ripped the thing from the wall, and an alarm began to sound. The cops startled, looked around. Marco walked straight up to them and sprayed the two in the face. A cloud of white exploded from the extinguisher. The two cops fell to the floor, coughing and wheezing and holding their throats. Drew began to cough. A bonus for Marco. "It's the goddamn mall rat," he shouted up to Mike. Marco blasted the cops again. "I'm your knight in shining armor, you ass." Mike hopped off the column. He unhooked himself from the rope. "What's your plan, Taco?" he said. Marco blasted the cops again. They fell back. "Follow me." He dropped the fire extinguisher and bolted for the service hallway, and Mike and Drew raced after him at the door. Marco slid the key through the port. The scanner flashed. The door opened with a clank and the magnetic lock unlocking. He pulled it open. "After you," he said. Mike and Drew dashed in, and Marco closed the door behind all three of them. "We have to get Ryan," Mike growled. "Follow me," Marco said, leading them down the hall. There had to be an elevator somewhere. Drew stood up to the extinguisher. Mike stayed behind. "Come with us," he said. "What's in it for me?" Marco had his hand in his pants pocket, his exit card at the ready. He'd notched the edge of the universal card near the corner to identify it. Mike smiled. "The mall is our oyster," he said. "Between the two of us, I think we can make all our dreams come true." Marco took his hand off the card. He pulled the police radio from his jacket and turned it on. Mike's face expressed approval. "You've been busy." Marco couldn't help but smile at Mike's praise. He turned the radio off. "They almost have Ryan down off the rope. We'd better move." They caught up with Drew near the door, then busted out, extinguisher blasting. People ran from their path screaming. They were the masters of all they surveyed. Lexi, page 251. From beneath the pile of wreckage that was once the medical center, Lexi could hear people around her, voices talking. That was all she could sense beyond the darkness. Fabric pressed against her face, making it hard to breathe. She angled her head, creating a larger pocket of air between the curtain and the floor. Every few seconds she cried out to the people, banged on the curtain above her. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The person on top of her had stopped coughing, and the body felt cold against her skin. She would not die like this. It took the voices time, minutes, hours, to get close to her. She saw the bright flash of lights on, and that brought some hope. Soon she could hear actual words. Then the curtain was lifted off her. The man's eyes widened upon finding her. "I've got a live one," he shouted, then knelt and pushed the gurney off of her. Pins and needles pricked through Lexi's legs. As the blood flowed back through them, she cried out. It was so painful. She wished he'd just left the bed on top. "Lexi!" Her mother pushed back a stack of crates and fell beside her, began to kiss her face. Lexi dragged her legs from under the body and threw her arms around her mother's neck. The pins and needles were agonizing, like a million bees stinging her from the inside. "Did you get Dad?" she asked, pulling back to arrange her body better. Dottie sat straighter. "He's in here." Lexi explained how Arthur had been near the plywood wall when the rioters broke through. The senator immediately ran toward the broken front wall of the store. The man who'd found Lexi, Dr. Chen, she was told, joined the senator. Lexi crawled from behind the gurney to better see where they were digging. "He was closer to the center, near the door," she shouted. Soon they lifted a huge flap of broken plywood and found Arthur barely conscious. Her mother screamed, thinking he was dead, until his eyes flickered. Then she cried and kissed his face. Tears ran down Lexi's cheeks. She hadn't killed her father after all. The senator yelled into her walkie-talkie to have an announcement made that any medical personnel left in the mall should report to the emergency medical center in the paperclips on the first floor to assist with helping those hurt in the riot. Then her mother began hunting through the wreckage for supplies. "Let me help," Lexi said, pushing herself to standing. Her legs still tingled, but they worked. "Everything out here is trash," Dottie said. "Let's get the stuff from the ICU." She led Lexi towards the back of the paperclips, where a hole had been cut into the wall. A thick sheet of plastic hung over the opening. "Wait here," her mother said. "We've been using this space to store the bodies we've found." "How many have you found?" Lexi asked. "So far 15 by my count." 16, Lexi said. "A woman died in the Abercrombie." Her mother's face softened. She pulled Lexi into a hug. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said. Lexi relaxed into her mother's arms, feeling like a weight had been lifted off of her, and she held tighter to her mother. "I'm so sorry I messed everything up," she said. Her mother's breathing hiccuped. Lexi felt a tear against her cheek. "Things were messed up from the beginning," Dottie said. "I'm sorry I got so angry." The walkie-talkie crackled to life, announcing that a doctor and 2 nurses had shown up at the front gate and were examining Arthur. Lexi and her mother unwound their arms, looking at each other. They smiled. "I should get those supplies," her mother said. "I'll wait here," Lexi said. Her mother kissed her forehead, then went through the plastic door, and Lexi craned her neck to check what they were doing with her father. Then she heard her mother scream from inside the ICU. Lexi swept the thick plastic aside and was greeted with a stench, the likes of which not even the grossest garbage bin had achieved. "Mom!" The foul air choked her voice. She pulled her shirt collar over her nose and mouth. She was inside the Pancake Palace, though it had changed drastically since her breakfast there last Sunday. It seemed like years had passed since then. Boxes marked medical equipment and freeze-dried food lined what used to be the counter. The booths had been torn out and replaced by rows of shrouded gurneys, some covered in plastic tents. The doors to the kitchen were still swinging, and Lexi pushed through them and saw her mother standing in front of what must have been the walk-in freezer, her hand on the handle of the huge metal door. "Don't come any closer," her mother said. Lexi came closer. A cold mist curled from the doorway, and frost glinted off something that, as the mist most likely going to die. Next, people will try to hide their symptoms, lie to themselves about being sick. This means they won't seek treatment. They'll stay out in the populace and infect more people. But you have to be honest with them, Lexi said. Honesty is not always the best policy. The senator pulled the walkie-talkie from her belt. I need a team to the ICU. Bring duct tape and caulk to seal a doorway. Her mother walked to the kitchen, then noticed Lexi wasn't following. The team will take care of it, the senator said. Let's go check on your dad. She kept walking. Lexi made a mental note of the space, projected the number of bodies inside. They were isolated in this mall for the foreseeable future, and someone had to know the truth, had to be ready with it for the next time the government decided to hide it with a deadly lie. Coming, Lexi shouted, trotting to catch up. And if that someone had to be her, then so freaking be it. In the bright, clean, fresh air of the paper clips, Lexi spotted her mother beside a gurney. In it rested her father, his arm bound between two strips of cardboard and held to his chest in a sling. His shirt had been cut away from his shoulder, which was wrapped in gauze. The Ross clan, he said, together again. Always, her mother said, smiling at Lexi. Always, Lexi said, and hoped it could be true. The senator. Dottie folded the list and handed it to Hank, the waiting chief of security, a large cop who smelled like he hadn't even rinsed off since the beginning of this nightmare. You want me to make this announcement, he said, perusing her work. No, she said, cranking her head forward until her neck cracked. They know my voice now. I should do it. She took back the paper and stood. You start the body search. If there was a dead saleslady in the Abercrombie stockroom, there had to be others littered around the mall, and she wanted the corpses brought to the Pancake Palace before they caused any additional hysteria. She would distract the masses with her new plan to organize their mall security, given the massive failure of the feds. She felt any plan was an improvement. At least she had a handle on her family. Arthur was convalescing on the couch in the Apple Store stockroom, and Lexi was sitting next to him, helping him to type in the population database she asked them to create. It was nice having all the Rosses on the same page. She made her way to the mall offices on the third floor, and at the far end of the hall, near the ice skating rink, she'd been given the mall's manager access card before he fell ill. His was the first frozen face she'd recognized in the Pancake Palace freezer. It was a terrible thing to admit, but she could not miss his interfering presence. The mall offices were empty, save for the monitoring station. She and Hank had agreed that no matter what happened, they needed to keep one guard on the closed-circuit camera system. There were cameras covering every public space in the mall and the parking areas. These cameras were their eye on the masses. It was through them that they'd had some warning of the oncoming riot and were able to evacuate the feds and lock down the portal before anyone could escape and infect the world. That was the only order she'd been given by the president, keep the virus from getting out. This, of course, left the responsibility of managing a population of several thousand with her. She had 4 cops, 1 in a coma, a mall security force of 50, a number that might be less after the bodies were finally identified, some 150 tasers, 4 handguns, one of which was reported missing, 2 shotguns, 10 canisters of tear gas, and 20 riot shields. This required not a little creative thinking. She reached the microphone connected to the mall announcement system and collapsed into the chair beside it. She wiped the arm's rest with a disinfecting cloth, then the mic itself, took a sip from her water bottle and turned the system on. Attention, residents of the shop, said Stonecliffe. She began. I apologize for the manner in which yesterday's announcement was made. It was not our intention to cause anyone to panic. Anyone who suffered any injuries as a result of last night's incident should report to the medical center located in the paper clips on the first floor. Anyone with medical training should also please report to the paper clips to assist those in helping the injured. With respect to the flu virus announced yesterday, if you begin to develop symptoms including chills, a cough, or a runny nose, please report to the paper clips for treatment. Security guards will be handing out face masks and hand sanitizer. Please wear your mask and apply the sanitizer before touching any surface and before meals. Avoid touching your face. These small measures will help prevent the spread of the disease. We have been given additional cots by the government and will set these up in 3 locations within the mall. Families, please report to the Home Mart for registration and assignment of beds. Women and girls, please report to the JCPenney. Men and boys, please report to the Lord & Taylor. These locations will be your home stores. If you are in need of a change of clothes, Depots will be established on the first floor of each home store where you can trade in your clothes for a new set. You will no longer be able to purchase clothing. You will also not have a choice in what clothing you are given. We apologize in advance for any inconvenience this may cause. We have been given sufficient quantities of food by the government for the duration of this quarantine, however long it lasts. Meals will be served in the first floor common areas. If you have a life-threatening food allergy, please notify the security guard when you register at your home store. Other than life-threatening conditions, we cannot accommodate any other dietary requests. If you have any comments or concerns, please bring them to the attention of one of the security guards. We will try to address every situation to the best of our ability. This is an unusual and trying situation, but we are all in this together. By working together and following a few simple rules, we can all make it through this with the least incident and suffering. Thank you so much for your patience and attention, and God bless you all. She flipped off the machine and pushed the mic away. It was impossibly draining, infusing her voice with hope and energy to try to keep the masses from spiraling into despair. She just had to keep them hopeful. If they had hope, they could be controlled. As she left the offices, she waved to the guard on duty. Kin, she thought. She had better learn their names, and stopped into the empty hall. This end of the third floor was always rather quiet, especially since the ice skating rink was closed Thursday due to a coolant malfunction. The senator glanced at the locked doors to the rink. They couldn't have. She ran back into the offices. Kin, where are the tenants' keys? Manager's office should have ones to a few stores, but we don't keep keys to the anchor stores. The ice skating rink, she said. I just need the key to that. That's one he should have, Kin said, leading her into the dark office once occupied by the odious little troll. We're always having maintenance issues with that thing. Kin opened a cabinet and picked a small ring from a hook. Here you go. You need to cool off, he said, winking. Dottie laughed because that was what you did when someone thought they were funny. There should be Oscars for politicians. She took the key and stalked out to the hall. The door to the skating rink opened into a dark vestibule. The temperature inside was several degrees colder, and Dottie flicked on the lights. Pictures of smiling girls in spandex lined the walls. On one side of the foyer there was a counter behind which rental skates gleamed. On the other side a dark office. In front of her were two more doors. Dottie touched the handle of one and was shocked by the cold. The metal bit her fingertips. Coolant failure, my ass. Slipping her hand inside her sleeve, she pushed the handle down and pulled open the door. A blast of freezing air slapped her skin. The rink was black as night. No light shined anywhere, and Dottie felt around the inside of the doorway for a switch. It took a minute for the lights strung high on the ceiling to reach full power, but even in their first dim glow, Dottie saw the bodies. They were piled on the ice, row after row, not even wrapped in body bags, arms splayed, hair falling over face. The ice itself was tinged red. Dottie's legs gave out. She slid against the door and came to rest on the frozen tile. There had to be hundreds on the ice, maybe 1,000. This many couldn't have come through the med center. Had all these been found in the mall, or had patients died fast enough to keep pace with the newly sick? Was this why the suits had refused to give her access to the intake logs of the paper clips? 1,000 dead, and they didn't tell me. But hadn't they? Why else would the president order a quarantine of 1,000 citizens? Only if the virus was this deadly would the government have authorized trapping them like rats on a sinking ship. She didn't have the luxury of panic. She pulled the walkie-talkie from its holster on her belt and clicked to the Hank's channel. No orders, she said. I'm listening. Bring the bodies to the ice skating rink, she said. Use the surface passage. No civilians are to ever come into the ice skating rink. Roger that. Had he known? He had to have known. How many people were harboring secrets from her? No more. She would canvass every goddamn inch of this mall before the end of the day. She would find that missing gun, nail those kids who blasted her cops with fire extinguishers, and get things from some semblance of order before night fell. This was her sinking ship now, and Dorothy Ross ran a tight ship. Okay, you guys, that's end of book 1. What? Okay. Whew. Who will make it out alive? Book 2. Is there a book 2? Day 7. Wait a minute. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Okay. Noon. It was like reading the cast list for a twisted new reality show. Mall quarantine show was reality. Some of these people really were dead. That kind of thinking was too depressing, so Lexi Ross decided to not even focus on the names anymore. She just input the words. Her mother, Senator Dorothy, the now official head honcho of them all, had charged her with recreating the population database her father had made for the government hazmat people. When they bolted from the building, they took all copies with them, which suggested that locking all the civilians. I can't believe there's a book 2 and we don't have an ending. It's amazing. It took me like a year to do book 1. So, I don't know. You let me know if you want me to keep going on book 2. I hope that this helped you relax. I hope you get a good night's sleep and wake up refreshed and renewed. Well, that was fun. It only took me like a year. Thanks for hanging in. If you have gone this far, then post a comment that you made it to the end. So let me know. That's it for No Safety in Numbers.